In the year 1095, specifically in the Vatican City in Italy, hatred was tearing at the door of the Vatican. Urban II was crying with regret and remorse over the Jerusalem they had lost, so he decided to exploit the disintegration of the Muslims. The conflict that was between them at that time called for a crusade to occupy Jerusalem, so the Christians advanced with a fanatical crusader spirit that hated Islam towards the lands of the Muslims and took advantage of the weakness of the Seljuks of Rum and crossed through their lands. They also took advantage of the dissolution of the Abbasid state and marched to the Levant and entered it with all ease, by surprise and disagreement between the princes of the Muslims. They established 4 Crusader emirates in the Levant, which are the Emirate of Edessa, Antioch, Tripoli, and the Emirate of Jerusalem, which was founded in 1099 after the Crusader forces arrived and besieged the 3rd Muslim sanctuary. Jerusalem was under the rule of the Shiite Fatimid state, and as expected of the Sons of Pleasure, as soon as they saw the Crusader forces, they left Jerusalem and fled in search of the hidden imam to save them. They left the city as a prey for the Crusaders without any protection, so that these scoundrels could commit all kinds of abominations. They slaughtered pregnant women, ripped open the bellies of pregnant women, and killed children and the elderly. Historian Raymond Eagle, who accompanied the First Crusade, mentioned that rivers of blood ran from the hooves of the horses, and the Crusaders were stumbling from the sheer amount of blood. They killed approximately 30,000 Muslims and burned all the Jews in Jerusalem, and even the Christians who differed from them in doctrine when they converted to Islam, so they killed them all and turned the Al-Aqsa Mosque into a pen for pigs. A man named Najm al-Din Ayyub left the castle of Takrid after he was its governor, but he fled from it for fear that he and his family would be killed because of the conspiracies and intrigues that the Abbasid state was living in and the assassinations of the Shiite Hashashin of the Abbasid princes. On that night in which Najm al-Din Ayyub fled, his wife gave birth to a boy while they were on the road, so Najm al-Din's family considered that boy brought bad luck to his family because of his strange birth. But that boy will do what thousands of men were unable to do, and will rule one of the strongest Islamic states in history, will be keen and break the cross. That boy who they thought was bad luck is the Eagle of the East and the Khagan of Islam, Sultan al-Nasir Yusuf Salah al-Din al-Ayyubi. There is a difference between historians on the origin of Salah al-Din al-Ayyubi. Ibn al-Athir mentioned that he was of Kurdish origin, and the origin of the Ayyub family goes back to the Kurdish city of Duwin. However, Al-Hasan bin Dawud al-Ayyubi mentioned in his book Al-Fawaid al-Jaliyya fi al-Fara'id al-Nasiriyya that his ancestors were Arabs from Bani Murrah bin Auf, and they sought refuge with the Kurds in the city of Duwin, but they were not Kurds and did not even marry from them. They acknowledge their Arab lineage and do not acknowledge that they are Kurds. This issue is a matter of debate among historians and has not been settled until today. But what matters to us is that Saladin was a Muslim who worked to support Islam and Muslims. We do not care about his lineage or ethnicity. A brother of religion is more steadfast to us than a brother of lineage. As Salman al-Farsi, may God be pleased with him, said, "I am the father of Islam. I have no father but him." If they boast about Qais or Tamim and his return to Najm al-Din Ayyub, he sought refuge after his escape with the ruler of Mosul, Imad al-Din Zengid, who was a righteous and religious man. He was the first to truly fight the Crusaders and defeat them. The first Crusader emirate in the east, the Emirate of Edessa, fell at his hands. Therefore, Imad al-Din Zengid is considered the first mujahid against the Crusaders. However, after the Crusaders failed to fight him on the battlefield, they resorted to assassinating him through the filthy Shiite Hashashin in the year 1146. When Imad ad-Din died, his son Nur ad-Din Zengid took over the rule of Mosul, so Najm ad-Din and his brother Asad ad-Din Shirkuh became the most important assistants to Nur ad-Din Mahmud. Saladin was then 8 years old. Saladin grew up in the palace of Sultan Nur ad-Din Zengid and was a genius like no other. He was a scholar of engineering, mathematics, and chemistry, a jurist, a man of letters, a poet, and a scientist. He was a knight and a fighter like no other in Islam. However, despite his military prowess, he was inclined in the early years of his life to science and jurisprudence more than military strategies. However, he realized that Islam needed leaders and fighters to restore the Muslim sanctity that had been captured. He joined Nur ad-Din's army and became one of the most important members of the army, and became the commander of the city's police. At the age of 25, he was a just and religious man who restored the rights of all the oppressed. Egypt was under Fatimid rule at that time, and there was a dispute between two ministers over power, Shawar ibn Mujir al-Sadi and Dirgham ibn Amr. Dirgham sought the help of the Crusaders to rule Egypt, and indeed he seized control of Egypt with their help. Shawar rushed to Nur ad-Din Zengi to ask for help against Dirgham and the Crusaders. Najm ad-Din advised Nur ad-Din Zengi to help Shawar reclaim Egypt, as it was the treasure trove of the earth. Nur ad-Din Zengi opened up to Egypt, and Egypt would help him with its economy and endless funds in eliminating the Crusaders. Moreover, the Crusaders were on their way to support Dirgham. This meant that if Nur ad-Din did not act, the Crusaders would seize all of Egypt. Nur ad-Din Zengi ordered Asad ad-Din Shirkuh to lead a military campaign and head to Egypt. Shirkuh took with him his nephew Saladin, who was 16 years old. As soon as Shirkuh and Saladin arrived in Egypt, they seized it and entered Cairo as conquerors. They seized the ministry and executed Dirgham as punishment for his betrayal and seeking help from the Crusaders. Shawar regained the ministry, but as soon as Shawar sat on the ministerial chair, as was the custom of the Shiites in all countries, Shawar betrayed Asad ad-Din Shirkuh and informed the Crusaders of his camp in Bilbais after asking them for help against the Muslim Zengid dynasty. The Crusaders came quickly and besieged Shirkuh in the city of Bilbais for 3 months. Asad ad-Din in Bilbais had only 3,000 fighters, while the Crusader army was enormous and he did not know its end. So Shirkuh was forced to withdraw to Damascus due to the small number of soldiers, and so as not to inflict a devastating blow that would make it difficult to leave. When he arrived with his soldiers in Damascus, he met with Nur ad-Din Mahmud, and Nur ad-Din realized that Egypt was now without soldiers, and that the Crusaders would take the help of the traitor Shawar. So Nur ad-Din provided Shirkuh with 2,000 fighters and ordered him to return to Egypt to conquer it. The Battle of Giza was the first battle of Saladin. Saladin had put a well-thought-out plan and presented it to his uncle Shirkuh. He was very impressed by it and immediately agreed to it. The plan was to put Asad al-Din Shirkuh in command of the right flank instead of the center, and to put the most skilled knights behind him on the right flank. Saladin would lead the center himself. Then the Crusaders would attack the center immediately. Thinking that Asad al-Din was leading the center, the right wing would turn behind the Crusader army, and the Crusaders would be surrounded from the front and the rear, including the Muslims who were stabbed. Just as Saladin expected, as soon as the Crusaders arrived at the battlefield, they attacked the center of the Muslim army. Saladin retreated before them, and he was drawn further into the trap. Then his uncle moved and surrounded the Crusaders from behind, and the Crusader ranks began to collapse. The Crusaders were defeated in a crushing defeat, and Saladin was able to capture one of the greatest Crusader leaders, the Emir of Caesarea. After this great victory, Asad al-Din Shirkuh headed to Alexandria because it hated Shawar, and a revolution had broken out in the city against his rule. As soon as Shirkuh reached the gates of Alexandria, the residents welcomed him as a conqueror. Shawar then met with the Crusaders to return the documents. When reinforcements arrived for the Crusaders from his emirates in the Levant, they moved with them to retake Alexandria. When they reached the walls of Alexandria, it was under the rule of Saladin. Asad ad-Din Shirkuh went out with most of his forces to Upper Egypt in an attempt to subjugate it. Saladin had 1,000 fighters in Alexandria at most. With this group of brave men, Saladin was able to repel the Crusader army and the traitorous army of Shawar. The siege of Alexandria lasted for several months, during which the Crusaders were unable to storm it. European and Muslim historians describe what Saladin did in the siege of Alexandria as a miracle by all military standards. At a time when Muslims were united, supporting and triumphing over one another, Nur ad-Din Mahmud moved immediately to lay siege to the Crusader emirate of Tripoli in the Levant to relieve the pressure on Saladin in Alexandria. At that time, the Crusaders submitted and sent a message to Asad ad-Din Shirkuh asking for peace because Nur ad-Din had attacked the Emirate of Tripoli in the Levant. They wanted to return with their forces to the Levant to rescue it from the hands of the Muslims. Asad ad-Din Shirkuh realized that the Muslims could not win the unequal battle in Egypt, and he also realized that the Crusaders were leaving Egypt anyway to rescue Tripoli. Shirkuh agreed to the peace treaty on the condition that his nephew and his soldiers leave Alexandria in peace, and that the Muslim and Crusader armies leave Egypt, and that no revenge be taken against the people of Alexandria for standing with them. The Crusaders agreed to this, and the Crusaders and Shirkuh left Egypt. However, as soon as Shirkuh returned to the Levant, the Fatimid Caliph sent to Nur ad-Din Zengi to rescue him. The Crusaders moved again to seize Egypt, but Nur ad-Din Zengi refused to respond to this request, as Nur ad-Din realized that Shawar was a traitor who had no covenant. So, they rescued him. The Fatimid repeated his request once again. He prepared the armies, so Asad ad-Din Shirkuh went out for the third time to Egypt. Amalric I, the Crusader king, had already arrived in Egypt and burned the city of Al-Qatai. He was preparing to enter Cairo, but bad news came to him that Asad ad-Din Shirkuh had arrived in Egypt. Amalric decided to lift the siege and quickly headed to the city of Suez to repel Asad ad-Din Shirkuh's soldiers, but Shirkuh outflanked him and quickly reached Cairo. As soon as he reached its walls, Amalric realized that Cairo would open its doors to Asad ad-Din Shirkuh and welcome him like a conqueror. He realized that he would not be able to fight Asad ad-Din Shirkuh's forces if the Egyptian forces joined them, so he decided to withdraw from Egypt, abandon Shawar, and leave the Crusaders. Shawar faces his worst fate. This is the end of every traitor to Islam and Muslims. By God, there is no God but him. No man who allies with the Kaf against his Muslim brothers will be betrayed by the infidels in the end. As soon as Asad ad-Din Shirkuh entered Cairo with his nephew Saladin, Shirkuh ordered the immediate execution of Shawar. The Fatimid Caliph handed him the Vizirat, and Asad ad-Din Shirkuh became the first ruler of Egypt. The Fatimid Caliph had no say in the matter. He was a nominal caliph, like the Abbasid Caliph at that time, and all matters were in the hands of the vizier. Therefore, the actual rule of Egypt was in the hands of Asad ad-Din Shirkuh. However, 2 months later, Asad ad-Din Shirkuh fell from his horse, and that great fighter died. After him, the vizierate was taken over by his nephew Saladin al-Ayyubi, specifically in March 1169 AD. Yusuf was young, and all the Shiites, the Crusaders, and even some of the spiteful ones from the Zengid palace coveted him. The Shiites began plotting against Saladin and tried to remove him from the ministerial seat. The Caliph al-Ayyid was the one who was plotting these plots, but Saladin discovered his secret, so he was arrested and executed. Al-Mutamin's followers went to the Negro Regiment in Egypt, a military regiment consisting of 50,000 soldiers, and asked them to fight Saladin, as that Sunni did not deserve to take over the ministry in the Shiite Fatimid state, and their master Al-Mutamin had also been killed. Indeed, the Negro revolt began in Egypt, but Saladin deployed his forces throughout the world, including the Zengid army and the Sunnis in Egypt who had joined him. He crushed their revolt by force, dispersing that regiment and expelling them from Egypt. Saladin realized that the Shiites had openly declared war, so he decided to get rid of them immediately after learning from the mistake of his uncle Shirkuh. When he thought well of them, he decided to help them. However, these people use taqiyya to achieve their own interests, but when you no longer have that interest, they turn against you with all impudence. This is what we hope from all our Muslim brothers in all countries, never to be deceived by the Shiites. If they support you one day, know that it is for a temporary interest, which, when you no longer have that interest, will immediately annihilate you, just as happened to our people in Iraq and other countries. And he even destroyed the Shiite revolution that Saladin put down. At that time, the Shiites did not realize that this handsome, calm young man was not tasty meat for them to eat and enjoy. Saladin had devised a plan to eliminate all the Shiite countries in the entire world, not only Egypt, so the Shiites would not have any ability to occupy Egypt again. As soon as Caliph al-Adid was on his deathbed, Saladin sent for sheikhs from the Levant and Iraq to call the people of Egypt to adhere to the Sunni doctrine and fight all forms of Shiite disbelief in the country. The majority of the common people in Egypt were still Muslims of the Sunni doctrine, so it was easy to uproot the Shiite doctrine in Egypt, and that is what we hope for today in all the Islamic countries occupied by the filthy Shiites. As soon as Saladin was reassured that the Sunni doctrine was established in the souls of all Egyptians, he even ordered prayers for the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad and declared Sunnism as the official religion of the country. After Saladin closed Al-Azhar for a period of time because it was established by the Shiites to spread the Shiite religion in the country, Saladin ordered its reopening as a Sunni mosque according to the Sunni doctrine to spread the Islamic religion throughout Egypt. With this event, the Shiite Fatimid state ended, which lasted for approximately 262 years. The overthrow of the Shiite Fatimid state was Saladin's first step to liberate the holy places, and this is what we need today as well, as it is not possible to liberate the Muslim holy places from the hands of the Crusaders and others, and its emergence is still exposed to the Shiites of the infidels, and the Shiite state cannot remain after it handed over the Muslims' Jerusalem on a silver platter to the Crusaders. That state deserved to be overthrown since its first year, as Islam never saw any good from it, and it never raised a sword in the face of an enemy of Islam. Rather, its swords were only at the throats of Muslims, and its lands never expanded except by warring with the Sunnis and seizing their countries, just like our days with Iran. That Shiite Magianism only fought the Sunnis, and its lands only expanded at the expense of the Sunnis in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, and elsewhere. It is always said that the road to Jerusalem passes through Baghdad, Damascus, and Sana'a, only to complete the Iranian Shiite crescent, and the return of the king of the Persian state again to those lands, so do not be deceived by their verbal war against the Jews and Christians to deceive the foolish among the Shiite Arabs, for they and the Crusaders and the enemies united against the Sunnis, and with the return of Saladin, who after declaring the allegiance of Egypt to the Abbasid state in Baghdad, announced his alliance with his emir in the Levant, Nur ad-Din Zengid. Amalric, the king of the Crusaders in Jerusalem, was shocked when he learned that this young man who crushed his soldiers in Suez and Alexandria had tightened his grip on Egypt. Amalric realized that the situation did not bode well. Amalric was the only one among the Crusaders who realized the great danger of Saladin, and that young man was not an easy target as the Shiites thought, so he asked the Catholic Pope in Rome to call for a huge crusade from Europe against Egypt, but no one in Rome responded to that campaign, so he asked the Emperor of the Byzantine Empire to help him occupy Egypt, and they agreed that the Crusader army would attack the Levant from Sinai and attack the Crusader fleet, both Levantine and Byzantine, from the direction of Damietta. Indeed, the Crusader fleet arrived first in Damietta and besieged it for 50 days, but Saladin had expected a fierce crusade war and had prepared well for the siege of Damietta, so God granted them the blessing of destroying the Crusader fleet and burning most of the ships and siege machines. After the Byzantine fleet was delayed for a long time while the land crusade had reached Arish, when news of the fleet's withdrawal came, it withdrew quickly. However, Saladin's knights pursued them until they clashed with them in the Deir al-Bala area in central Gaza, completely dispersing them and killing thousands of Crusader knights. As for the Byzantine fleet, which the Crusaders had long awaited, it was unable to reach the shores of Damietta. A severe storm blew up, sinking most of the ships. Those who survived returned to Constantinople disappointed and defeated, after God defeated them with his soldiers from storms and waves. God spared the Muslims in Egypt their evil and sent down upon them soldiers from him. With Saladin's victory over the Crusaders, he was firmly established in ruling Egypt and became its undisputed first ruler. After that, in the year 1174, Nur ad-Din Zengid died. May God have mercy on Sultan Nur ad-Din Mahmud, son of Imad ad-Din Zengid, the pious and struggling sultan who united the Levant in the face of the Crusaders. Then came to power his son, Al-Salih Ismail, who became a tool in the hands of the ministers because he was still a young child. Nevertheless, Saladin declared his allegiance to Al-Salih Ismail, the son of his emir, Nur al-Din Mahmud. However, with time, Saladin realized that he was declaring his loyalty to the ministers who were greedy for power, as they controlled the mind of the young boy, and everything that his emir Nur al-Din had built would be lost because of these weak-willed leaders. In only a few years, we would see the Crusader flag waving over the citadel of Damascus. Saladin decided to move his forces to seize it from the hands of these ignorant people. He announced that he was subservient to al-Salih Ismail, but he had to remove these greedy people. They soon moved al-Salih Ismail towards Aleppo and announced their rejection of Saladin's presence in the Levant. Saladin controlled all of the Levant until he was protected, and nothing remained outside his rule except Homs, Aleppo, Mosul, and the Euphrates Island. These Zengid leaders tried to distort Saladin's image, saying that he had no concern other than rule and that he did not want to fight the Crusaders. However, God wanted to exonerate Saladin, so he moved Raymond III, the ruler of Tripoli, to attack Homs, a huge blow to those who saved the city of Homs from falling, even though it was not under his rule. The Crusader forces withdrew when they saw Saladin's forces, so Saladin returned from Homs again. Can you imagine that Saladin was preserving the property of Muslims even if it was under the rule of his enemies? This is the renewer of religion in the 12th century, whom the spiteful and Shiite accuse of being greedy for power. However, Saladin wanted to get rid of the strife of these leaders so that he could unite the Muslims and devote himself to fighting the Crusaders. He besieged the city of Aleppo, in which al-Salih Ismail ibn Nur al-Din was. Qutb al-Din, the emir of Aleppo, realized that he was unable to deal with Saladin's forces, so he resorted to a malicious act and decided to assassinate him. He sent a messenger to the Shiite assassins asking them to assassinate Saladin, and they would have what they wanted. Rashid al-Din Sinan, the Sheikh of the Mountain, the emir of the Shiite Batini group, agreed and sent 13 strong fighters to assassinate him in his camp. The assassins hated Saladin intensely because he ended the Shiite state in Egypt and made it forgotten. Indeed, the assassins penetrated Saladin's camp, disguised in the clothes of Ayyubid soldiers, with amazing stealth until they reached his tent and found him asleep. However, God woke him from his sleep before they could be assassinated. Saladin was able to kill most of them. When the guards heard him in his tent, they quickly entered and finished off those who remained alive to duel Saladin. Saladin was one of the strongest knights in history, and he was able to eliminate most of the assassin contingents on his own. Don't forget to support us by listening carefully to the upcoming announcement. If you find anything that contradicts the religion, turn a blind eye. All of this, and Saladin had not yet withdrawn his allegiance from al-Salih Ismail. All he wanted was to remove these corrupt leaders and place honorable and chivalrous people around the young king. These leaders, through al-Salih Ismail, requested a truce from Saladin, and Saladin agreed to the truce. The Crusaders also requested a truce from Saladin, and he agreed to it as well. The assassins of the Batiniya and threatened to eradicate it from the Levant, which was led by Rashid al-Din Sinan, the Sheikh of the Mountain. He was in a fortified castle called Qala'at al-Sayyaf. Saladin moved towards it and launched a crushing attack, destroying the castle and besieging them under a severe siege that lasted for several months. The Sheikh of the Mountain wrote to Saladin's uncle, Shihab al-Din Listing, asking him for forgiveness and accepting a political deal and a truce between them in exchange for lifting the siege of the castle. Saladin agreed to unify his efforts to fight the Crusaders. In 1077, Baldwin IV, King of Jerusalem, attacked the outskirts of Damascus. Saladin considered this a violation of the truce between them. Saladin gathered his army and headed to Palestine, where he destroyed a Crusader army near Beisan. He then advanced to Ashkelon, then attacked Ramla and Lydda, then reached the gates of Jerusalem. At that time, King Baldwin realized that his state was on the verge of annihilation, but Saladin did not attack the kingdom of Jerusalem. He made a mistake in doing so he continued to attack it. The Knights of the Cross were in Palestine without entering Jerusalem, but most of us are infallible. At that time, King Baldwin and his assistant Raynald, the governor of the Karak fortress, attacked Saladin's army by surprise in an area called Tel al-Jazar. Saladin's army was scattered and many of his soldiers were killed. Saladin was forced to return to Egypt and prepare again for the Crusaders. This was the only defeat Saladin suffered in his entire life. Defeat is grief and sadness when you see what is happening to our defenseless brothers. But prepare, and do as your ancestors did in those difficult days. Prepare well to turn every defeat and sadness into victory and joy in God's promise. This is what Saladin did. He returned to Egypt and prepared his army again. He learned from his mistakes in the defeat and created one of the strongest armies in the world at that time. That army included the Ayyubid Sultanate division. Historians classify that division of knights as the best division of knights known to history. That division emerged from the womb of defeat, so do not despair of the Spirit of God. After 1 year, Saladin returned to them with a huge army that they could not withstand. He returned to them with the glory of Islam, preparation for jihad, and soldiers of a wood that would shake the ground from beneath them. Saladin camped with his army near the city of Homs and waited for the arrival of the Crusaders. The Crusaders began their attack on the city of Hama. They tried to seize it, but the city's garrison was able to repel the Crusaders and fought desperately to defend the city. As soon as the news reached Saladin, he moved. He rushed to the city of Hama and attacked the Crusaders from the east and the west. The Crusaders were trapped between the Muslim forces from three sides, the east and the west, and the forces of the Islamic garrison in Hama. The battle began with fierce fighting, but God strengthened his soldiers, granted victory to his servant, and defeated the Crusaders alone. He was ashamed to kill the Crusaders, and an entire military unit was captured. Saladin ordered their entire execution because they were corruptors on earth. He wanted to send a message to the Crusaders: "You have nothing with us but annihilation." The Crusaders gathered their scattered soldiers and regrouped their army and tried to attack Damascus. Saladin met them in the Quneitra region on the Golan Heights in Syria. He unleashed his knights on them, tearing them apart. Baldwin escaped with great difficulty from the battle, and the Crusader army was once again annihilated in Quneitra. After this battle, the Crusaders realized that the Muslims had the upper hand, that Saladin had prepared an army completely different from the previous Islamic armies, and that the Muslims had become the masters of the land and the arbiters of the course of events. Terror filled their hearts, and they were certain that they were in a defensive position. They decided to build a fortress on the Jordan River, specifically at the Bridge of the Daughters of Jacob. They called that fortress the Pangs of Sorrows. Baldwin thought that this fortress would prevent the Muslims from reaching Jerusalem, so Saladin let them complete that. The great fortress was built to exhaust them economically and destroy the money they had in their hands. As soon as they finished building it, he sent to them asking them to destroy that fortress in exchange for 100,000 gold pieces. The Crusaders became furious and refused the offer. Saladin decided to destroy it himself and set out with his army towards the Bridge of the Daughters of Jacob. Saladin attacked. Suddenly, the battle began. The Crusader army consisted of two divisions, cavalry in the vanguard and infantry in the rear. Saladin attacked the army from the flanks, separating the cavalry from the infantry. Saladin then besieged the fortress, which fell after 60 days of intense siege. He razed it to the ground without paying a single dinar. The Battle of the Daughters of Jacob ended with the destruction of their fortress, the elimination of thousands of their forces, and the loss of most of their wealth. The Crusaders were certain that they had no power over Saladin and his forces, and that the end of their kingdom was inevitable after the Crusaders suffered a crushing defeat. Their armies were destroyed and their soldiers were wiped out. The Crusaders realized that the Muslim Ayyubid army was a different kind of army. Fighting with it was difficult and useless, and its knights were thunderbolts, as if they came from another world. They realized that they had no power over Saladin and his army, and that the time had come to appease that Muslim Sultan before he completely crushed their state. They quickly sent to Saladin, informing him that famine had spread throughout their country and that no crops were growing in their lands. They reminded him of his chivalry with them, a 6-year truce. Imad al-Din al-Isfahani, Saladin's writer, mentions in his book that Saladin responded to the Crusader messengers saying, "I agree to this truce so that it will not be mentioned that the Muslims defeated the Franks while they were hungry." During that truce, al-Salih Ismail, son of Nur al-Din Zengid, died, and the conflict began between his leaders over Aleppo, Mosul, and Al-Jazira al-Furat. Saladin entered Aleppo and Al-Jazira al-Furat, and the Ayyubid state now included Egypt, the Levant, Yemen, the Hijaz, and Iraq. As soon as Saladin entered Aleppo, he found the people in abject poverty and taxes were breaking their backs. He removed that injustice from the people, saying, "There is no good in princes who fatten while their families are hungry." Thus, the Zengid state ceased to exist, and it was left with nothing but a nominal rule in. The city of Mosul was led by the Zengid dynasty, a poor successor to the best predecessor. In the year 1184, poverty and hunger had bitten the Crusaders and destroyed them, so Raynald of Chatillon, the ruler of the fortress of Karak, began. By attacking Muslim caravans passing through the Gulf of Aqaba, Raynald became known in Islamic sources as Barna, meaning thief, because he used to rob pilgrim caravans heading to Mecca. However, as soon as news reached Saladin in Damascus that Raynald had attacked a Muslim caravan, he gathered his forces and considered this a breach of the truce. He encamped near the fortress of Karak, destroyed all the villages belonging to Raynald, and besieged the fortress until it was about to fall. However, King Baldwin IV sent him a message asking for forgiveness and asking to lift the hand of Raynald. He promised to punish him himself and compensate him for all the money that was in these caravans and to release all the Muslim prisoners. Saladin agreed. Shortly after that incident, leprosy overcame Baldwin IV, and he died. He had no children, but he had a sister named Sabella. Baldwin made his nephew heir to his throne, and he was called Baldwin V, but he was a young child afflicted with leprosy like his uncle. Only a few months later, he too died of leprosy. There was no longer an heir to the throne of Jerusalem at that time. The two most important men in the Crusader house competed for the throne. The first was Raymond, Prince of the Emirates of Tripoli, and the commander de Lusignan, the husband of Sabila. But Lusignan was unpopular in the Crusader community, and most of the Crusader leaders were inclined towards Raymond and directed her to make her Queen of Jerusalem, so Sabila agreed to their offer. But when the time came for the coronation, Sybil appointed her husband Delos Zenon as king of the Kingdom of Jerusalem instead of her. Raymond went mad and realized that the Crusader kingdom was about to be destroyed and said his famous quote, "While that lion is lurking for us with his fangs bared, that red one will come as king over the kingdom of God." They allied with the ruler of Karak and asked him to attack the Muslim caravans again. Raynald attacked the pilgrims' caravan. The Crusader historian William of Tyre mentioned that Saladin's sister and her son were in this caravan and that Raynald had captured them, but this is completely untrue. None of the Islamic sources mentioned such a statement. However, Ibn al-Athir mentioned that one of Saladin's relatives was in the caravan but was not captured and was protected by soldiers. The purpose behind this Crusader quote is to convince you that Saladin only acted to save his family, and this is untrue. All Muslims were a family of Saladin. He was fighting to defend all Muslims and not for personal interests, as they wanted to distort his image, may God have mercy on him, after he attacked Raynald. The caravan of pilgrims moved that madman and decided to sail ships and attack the city of the messenger of God to kidnap his noble body so that he could bargain over it with the Muslims. But as soon as the news reached Saladin, he went mad and swore to kill Raynald with his own hands if he captured him. Saladin immediately ordered Hussam al-Din Lutlu, the commander of the Islamic Navy in Egypt, to move immediately and attack the Crusaders in the Red Sea. Indeed, Hussam al-Din reached the port of Azab and destroyed all the Crusader ships and captured 17 Crusaders. Saladin ordered Hussam al-Din to scatter these prisoners among the major Muslim capitals such as Damascus, Cairo, and Aleppo, and to execute them in full view of the people. He would not accept a ransom for them, as these dogs were planning to steal the body of the master of creation. Peace and blessings be upon him. After that incident, the Crusaders realized that Saladin would vent his wrath on all the Crusaders and show them hell on earth before sending them to him. Raymond, the ruler of Tripoli, realized that if he did not save his country, it would be lost with the rest of the Crusader lands. He immediately sent a message to Saladin saying that he would not help Delezinon. He mentioned in his message that Tiberias is yours, so land in it and seize it, and I will leave it to you, so that you may gain strength through it against the Franks and weaken their hearts. Indeed, Saladin sent some of his forces to seize Tiberias. Raymond left the city open to the Muslims, so the Muslims crossed from it into the lands of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. King Al-Afdal ibn Saladin in Sabal-Afdal to conquer the city of Nazareth. The Crusaders in Jerusalem, Sabal-Afdal under the leadership of King Al-Afdal, son of Saladin, headed to the city of Nazareth to conquer it. Gerard, the leader of the Knights Templar, came out to them with 500 Crusader knights, but King Al-Afdal paid them no attention and continued on his way to Nazareth. And he sent them 500 knights, equal in number, to eliminate them. King Al-Afdal reached Nazareth, destroyed it completely, and turned the Crusaders' day into darkness, eliminating their forces and seizing everything in the city. Quickly cross the announcement. If you find anything that contradicts religion, lower your gaze. As expected, the Muslim knights were clearly superior. They rejected the Templars and crushed them all. In that battle, the Muslim knights' superior training and armament over the Crusader knights became clear. Only 3 men from the mighty Templars survived, as they claimed. They were Commander Gerard and 2 of his guards. Although you might think that losing 500 knights would be a huge problem, in reality they only had 5,000 armored knights divided into 10 divisions, each with 500 knights. They lost an entire division near Ain Jose, and the crowds raged and rioted in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Raymond III, the Emir of Tripoli, was accused of treason. They said that even if he was at odds with King Lusignan, he should not betray the cross. Raymond feared for his reputation among the Christians and decided to join the Crusader forces in Jerusalem. They met and held a war council. Lusignan and Arnat saw the necessity of going out to fight Saladin because the Crusader army had become extremely large after the Tripoli forces, led by Raymond, joined them. Raymond believed it was necessary to fortify Jerusalem and defend it against Saladin, because leaving the walls of Jerusalem was suicide in every sense of the word. He believed that Saladin's knights could not be stopped in any way. At that time, news reached the Crusader princes that Saladin's forces were besieging the fortress of Tiberias, where Raymond's wife and daughters were inside the fortress. The Crusaders began to prepare to move to save Raymond's family and the fortress of Tiberias. But unexpectedly, Raymond did not favor this attack and explained to him that Saladin was luring them out to meet him in an open area because he knew that his family was inside Tiberias, but going out to meet him would be collective suicide. Raymond was certain of Saladin's morals and mercy, and that even if he captured his wife and daughters, he would not harm them. He made them understand that the siege of Tiberias was nothing but a trick by Saladin to lure them out of the walls of Jerusalem. Raymond was certain that meeting Saladin in an open area was suicide itself, as no one could stop the extraordinary Ayyubid cavalry. Lusignan was impressed by Le Mans' opinion and ordered the strengthening of the walls of Jerusalem, as they would defend it if Saladin came, and also the shipment of supplies in preparation for a long siege. But Raymond and Gerard advised the king not to listen to Raymond's words, lest the soldiers think that the king does not have his own decision, and that Raymond is the final word in the kingdom. They reminded him that Raymond was still competing with him for the throne. If the soldiers saw that he was the one with the word and opinion, they would obey him, and then he would turn against you and take over the rule of Jerusalem. Lusignan rejected Raymond's suggestion to defend and fortify the castle and gave orders to go out to confront Saladin. He prepared the army, which numbered 60,000 fighters, and divided the Crusader army into 3 divisions, each marching behind the other. The vanguard was under the command of Raymond, while King Lusignan lost the middle. The rearguard was led by the governor of the city of Abilene, Prince Balian. The army set out in July and the heat was intense. They passed by a spring called Ain Turan, but the Crusader king did not stop there, thinking that he would reach Tiberias in a day at most. It was better to move quickly as there was no need to stop and waste time at Ain Turan. This was what Saladin was planning. Religion, and as soon as the Crusaders left Ain Turan, Saladin sent a group to guard it and prevent the Crusaders from returning to it. He also planned to attack the rear of the Crusader army, but with quick raids without engagement. The Muslim knights would advance to shoot arrows at the rear of the army, then withdraw before engagement and repeat the attack to weaken them. He also sent a division to attack the central forces led by King Lusignan. They began to shout and then quickly withdrew. He sent a third division to finish off the front of the army with arrows. Saladin attacked the Crusaders and rained arrows until they were almost wiped out. The Muslims continued shooting arrows throughout the night until the rear commander, Bali, sent a message to the king asking for help because the rear of the army was close to being annihilated. If the situation continued, not a single knight would remain alive. The king immediately ordered the entire army to encamp on the road between Ain Turan and Tiberias. They were surrounded, unable to advance to Tiberias or return to Ain Turan. They had no choice but to encamp and establish defenses to be able to repel the repeated Muslim attacks. As soon as the Crusaders established defenses and thought they were safe, fiery Muslim arrows rained down on them from every direction and surrounded them with fire and destruction, so their tents were burned and their entire camp was set on fire, and their night turned into day. The Muslims did not stop raining arrows throughout the night, and Saladin also ordered the burning of the dense forest surrounding the Crusaders, which made matters worse for these thirsty Crusaders who did not have water, in addition to their burning tents and the arrows that were falling and preventing them from sleeping. The smoke of the burning forest intensified on their chests, so they became surrounded from all sides by fire. Destruction, devastation, burning forest, burnt tents, running out of water, thirst, chaos, and the scorching weather of July. Lusignan realized too late that he had fallen into Saladin's trap, and Raymond was certain that what he had warned of had actually happened, saying, "We are all doomed. There is no escape." The Crusaders saw how clever and cunning Saladin was, as he made them fall into grave mistakes one after the other. They remained like meat on a flame, praying from every side until dawn broke. At that time, Saladin knew that the meat was cooked and it was time to devour it, so he sent the knights to run in circles around the Crusaders and shower them with arrows from everywhere, so that the Muslim arrows blocked the sun's rays due to their abundance, so the arrows were falling on them from every side. When the Crusaders tried to break this circle that revolved around them and death was upon them in the form of piercing arrows, the knights would move away quickly so that the armored Crusader soldiers could not reach them. The Muslim knights were at their best. Then they would attack them again and wrap themselves in another ring to strangle the Crusader army, and he rained arrows on him, and the Muslims continued to exhaust the Crusaders throughout the night, killing thousands of Crusaders. Lusignan realized that they had no escape from complete destruction except by breaking this circle of deadly arrows and opening a gap in the Muslim ranks to save their lives. So Raymond and Balian advanced with a group of knights towards Taqi al-Din's forces to make a gap in their ranks, and they launched a single attack to break this difficult siege. When Saladin saw this massive attack, he ordered Taqi al-Din to destroy the city to the outside. The Crusaders thought they had made a breach and escaped the siege, but Saladin was a brilliant planner and anticipated this attack. He had prepared a division to snatch them while they were escaping. As soon as the Crusaders crossed, they entered a new trap and found another division surrounding them from all sides to cut their necks. Only Balian and Raymond, along with a few knights, escaped from these pincers. Only a few of an army of more than 60,000 Crusaders escaped the massacre of Hattin. When the Crusaders realized that whoever tried to escape this siege was crushed in a death trap and all were slaughtered without mercy, everyone immediately threw down their weapons and fled. The Muslims captured 3,000 Crusaders after killing 3,000 others. All the leaders, officers, princes, and Queen Lusignan were captured. Only Baldwin, the rear commander, escaped and took refuge in Jerusalem, while Raymond III fled to Tripoli with some of his men. Only a few dozen of the Crusader army survived, and King Lusignan and Arnaud were captured. They were dragged in chains to Saladin's tent, for the time of reckoning had come. When he was brought before Saladin, Saladin gave the queen a cup. Lusignan drank, then Arnaud gave him water. Saladin became angry because he did not want to honor or secure him, and he said to the king, "You are the one who gave him water, I did not offer him water." He looked at Arnaud and said, "Why did you kill al-Hajjaj and say, 'Call your Muhammad to save us'? Didn't you know that we are standing guard at Muhammad's tent? I am the representative of the messenger of God in defending his nation." Saladin drew his sword and struck Arnaud's head. When the king saw Arnaud's head in the dust, he was seized with fear and panic until his complexion changed, and he thought that he too would be killed. Saladin said, "Do not be afraid. It is not the custom of kings to kill kings, but that traitor deserves to be killed." Despite the nobility of al-Nasir Saladin's sword, which was attested to by everyone, he ordered the execution of all the Knights Templar who had been captured because they were of a terrorist Crusader doctrine that aims to exterminate Muslims, so they will never accept peace. He had made peace before, but they betrayed all covenants and attacked Muslims. He also ordered the execution of all the Knights of Arnaud who participated in the attack on the tomb of the Messenger of God. May God bless him and grant him peace. Saladin did not forget the Muslims' revolt. After that, Saladin advanced and liberated the entire Levantine coast, so he opened Haifa, Nazareth, Safur, and Caesarea in the hands of the Crusaders, except for the cities of Tripoli. Pictures and part of the Emirate of Antioch, after which Saladin moved to recapture Jerusalem, the jewel in the crown of Muslims and their third holiest place, and he reached it on the first day of September 1187 AD. Baldwin was the commander of the Crusader rearguard at Hattin in the city of Jerusalem. He had asked Saladin's permission to come to his family, but when he saw the Muslim horde surrounding the city, he was reluctant to surrender Jerusalem, so he decided to break the covenant and fight the Muslims. That fool sent a threatening letter to Saladin saying that he would kill all the Muslim prisoners in the fortress and even kill all their women and children so that they would not fall into the hands of the Muslims. He would fight the Muslims until the last Crusader with them, until Saladin's army was destroyed. Saladin laughed at the content of the letter, ignored it, and continued his siege. The Europeans mentioned that a fierce battle took place at the walls of Jerusalem, in which Baldwin fought very bravely, and they depicted that epic in the famous movie King Damned of Heaven. However, this is pure lies and slander. The true story is that the king of Nazareth, Saladin, besieged them for a short period. He struck the walls of the castle with a catapult, destroying one of the city walls in less than 2 weeks. Baldwin was startled without warning when he saw Saladin and the Muslims inside the city walls, so he threw down his weapon and took cover for himself. Saladin and the Crusaders who were with him were captured. King al-Nasir Salah al-Din and al-Dunya Yusuf bin Ayyub entered the city of Jerusalem, and the Muslims regained it after 85 years of Crusader occupation. We mentioned that when the Crusaders occupied Jerusalem, they killed all its inhabitants, reaching 30,000 dead. When al-Nasir Salah al-Din entered it as a conqueror, he did not harm its people, not even the fighters among them. He pardoned everyone in exchange for paying a small ransom, even a dinar for each person able to pay. Even when a large number of them were unable to pay the dinar, Salah al-Din waived the ransom for them and did not treat them as slaves. In addition to all forms of mercy and tolerance, Salah al-Din allowed them to go to any city, so large numbers moved from Jerusalem to the city of Tyre. All those who had fled from the Levant coast had previously taken refuge in the city of Tyre, so there were thousands of Crusaders in that city. Salah al-Din's dream came true, and he liberated Jerusalem from the hands of the Crusaders. He brought the pulpit of Nur al-Din Zengid from Aleppo, which Nur al-Din had made to place in Al-Aqsa Mosque after its liberation. By the year 1189 AD, the Sultan extended al-Nasir Salah al-Din extended his authority over the entire Islamic country, from Iraq in the east to Libya in the west, and from Yemen in the south to the Levant in the north. The Crusaders were left with only the emirate of Tyre, Tripoli, and Antak, so King al-Nasir sent his brother Saif al-Din as his deputy in Yemen. He was greedy for the conquest of Jerusalem and said in his letter that today in the Levant we do not hear any idle talk or blasphemy except for the words, "Peace, peace." Despite all the kindness that Saladin provided to the Crusaders, they withdrew from Jerusalem and its environs and gathered in the city of Tyre until their situation grew and included approximately 50,000 Crusaders, which was ruled by a German prince named Conrad. Conrad was hoping to be the new king of the Crusaders. Saladin also released King Lusignan in exchange for a ransom on the condition that he would not fight the Muslims again. However, that barbarian broke the covenants and agreements. As soon as Lusignan arrived in the city of Tyre, he met with the Crusaders and decided to attack the city of Acre. Conrad initially refused to support King Lusignan and wished to remain in captivity so as not to compete with him for the Crusader kingdom. However, he agreed to help him in his war, hoping that he would be defeated before the walls of Acre and be finished with him forever. Lusignan and his forces besieged the city of Acre, which the Muslims had recently recaptured. It was a failed siege. In it, the Muslims were able to repel the Crusader attacks, but something happened that the Muslims did not expect. The news of the conquest of Jerusalem spread after 85 years of Crusader occupation until it caused a great uproar in Europe. The news of the fall of Jerusalem fell on its princes like a thunderbolt, causing a violent shock that was heard throughout Europe. They put aside their differences and united again. They launched a massive campaign, the Third Crusade, to reclaim the city of Jerusalem from the Muslims. It was the largest campaign in the history of the Crusaders. Pope George VIII called on the kings of Europe to launch a new crusade to reclaim Jerusalem. The German Emperor Frederick Barbarossa moved with his forces, numbering 300,000 fighters. The King of France, Philip Augustus, and the King of England, Richard the Lionheart, moved with each of them with another 300,000 fighters, in addition to volunteer soldiers from 11 European countries. The numbers of the Third Crusade amounted to approximately 100,000 fighters. These numbers are according to Arab and Islamic sources. European sources reduced that number to a third. The first to move towards the Holy Land was the German Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. He moved his forces eastwards towards Constantinople and requested passage from Emperor Isaac II, who was allied with Saladin. The religion was secret, but he decided to allow him to cross without providing him with any supplies. As soon as he crossed the Bosphorus, food ran out and he did not find anything to feed his soldiers. The Turkish tribes in Asia Minor kidnapped him, and they carried out deadly ambushes for the German soldiers. The German emperor lost many soldiers, and during the crossing of Emperor Frederick, the rivers near the city of Antak fell with his horse into the river and drowned, so most of his soldiers returned to their country disappointed without achieving anything. Of the 300 Germans, only 5,000 fighters led by Leopold, Prince of Austria, reached the Holy Land. May God spare the Muslims from their evils. As soon as Leopold arrived with the German forces, he helped Conrad and Lausanne in the siege of Acre, but they were unable to conquer it. Philip Augustus, King of France, arrived in Acre, and after them Richard the Lionheart arrived with the rest of the Crusader forces and joined the siege of Acre. At that time, it became difficult to hold Acre in the face of those huge forces, as it was besieged by nearly 700 fighters. Unfortunately, Acre fell into the hands of the Crusaders. The first thing that terrorist king called Richard the Lionheart did was kill 2,700 Muslims in Acre. But they plot, and God plots, and God is the best of plotters. During that siege, Sibylla, Lusignan's wife, died, which means that Lusignan was no longer king of Jerusalem, and the true heir to the throne of Jerusalem became Isabella, the younger sister of Bella, who was the wife of Conrad, Prince of Tyre. This meant that the new Crusader king in the east became Conrad, not Lusignan. However, Richard supported Lusignan, while Philip and Leopold supported Conrad. This led to discord in the Crusader camp, and they competed among themselves over the distribution of spoils. King Philip Augustus became displeased and withdrew with his French forces from the campaign and left only 100 fighters representing the French state in the Crusader lands, and returned to his country without hesitation, and God spared the Muslims from their terror, so Richard was left with the remnants of the Crusader forces, the Germans, the French, the armies gathered from Europe, and 300,000 England. Richard decided to occupy the city of Jaffa with his forces, but on the way, the Ayyubid forces appeared to him in the city of Arsuf, so he clashed with them in the city, and Saladin's knights attacked the Crusader forces and were on the verge of achieving a great victory, but the Crusader armies gathered against them from every direction. The number of Crusaders was 10 times the number of Muslims, so Saladin decided to withdraw with his forces to protect them. The Crusaders crossed Arsuf and occupied the city of Jaffa. Richard placed a garrison of some of the army there and left with the rest of the army. Saladin returned and attacked it again and recaptured the city of Jaffa from the hands of the Crusaders. As soon as the Muslims entered Jaffa, they began killing the Crusaders in revenge for what they did to the Muslims in the Acre massacre, but Saladin ordered them by stopping the killing. He said, "We do not follow their example, O servants of God, but we follow the example of the messenger of God." After the defeat of the Crusaders in Jaffa, Richard decided to take revenge for the defeat of his army, so he advanced and attacked Jaffa again, so Saladin decided to withdraw. Saladin quickly withdrew his forces from Jaffa, relying on the hit-and-run tactic in the Third Crusade. The crusade had approximately 700,000 fighters at the beginning, but it grew to 400,000 under Richard's command, while Saladin had 25,000 fighters. However, the most important advantage of his forces, after his faith in God, was that they were trained in a way that was unparalleled in the entire world. After Richard entered Jaffa without satisfying his thirst, he decided that it was time to reclaim Jerusalem. However, only God knows the soldiers of God. Winter surprised him and heavy snow and rain fell, so he resumed the Crusaders' advance towards Jerusalem. As soon as winter ended, Richard, the governor of the city of Sur, ordered him to return to the hills of Jerusalem. However, Saladin did not carry out the orders because Richard supported Lusignan, and disputes arose among the Crusader leaders. Richard realized that he would not achieve anything in the midst of these conflicts. He also received devastating news from England that his younger brother was trying to overthrow him, so he decided to end this failed crusade quickly. And returning to England to save his kingdom, Richard sent to Saladin asking him for peace. Saladin dictated his conditions to him, which were that Jerusalem would remain under the control of the Muslims, provided that the Christians would be allowed to make the pilgrimage to it, but they were unarmed and had no right to the holy city. Likewise, Aklan would remain in the hands of the Muslims. Richard was forced to accept Saladin's terms to end this failed campaign. This treaty was called the Treaty of Ramla in 1192. Richard returned disappointed and defeated to his isolated island in northern Europe, England, without achieving anything and without regaining Jerusalem as he had promised the Christians in Europe. History will witness that Saladin, with an army of 25,000 fighters, was able to defeat a Crusader campaign that numbered 1 million fighters. The largest Crusader campaign in history did not achieve anything and was defeated by the Muslims and forced to withdraw. The Crusaders were unable to enter Jerusalem again except through betrayal. They entered it for a few years, then Saladin's guardian expelled them from it again. In February 1193 AD, the jihad had exhausted Saladin, so he did not rest from the war for 20 consecutive years. Illness and fatigue began to spread through his body, and he was afflicted with bilious fever. His illness worsened. On the morning of the evening of February 1193, the master of the Kawakin and the sultan of the worshippers, Saif, died. Muslims and Nasr al-Din, Yusuf Salah, al-Din ibn Najm al-Din Ayyub ascended to his creator when he was 5 years old. That great mujahid died in his bed, but due to exhaustion from the many jihads over the course of 20 years, the eyes of the cowards did not sleep. When they searched for Salah al-Din's inheritance, the judge al-Fadil, the judge of Damascus, did not find in his estate anything but 47 dirhams and 1 gold dinar, and he did not leave any descendants. Salah al-Din, palaces but rather behind Muslims, staunch mujahids whom he brought out by the grace of God from darkness into light, and placed them in a position of honor among the nations after they had been displaced and defeated before his servant the cross.